All right, let's get right into it. This explainer is brought to you by webfitnews.co.nz, your source for in-depth reporting on stories that matter. Today, we're looking at a case that really forces us to ask some difficult questions about power, accountability, and justice. We're going to break down the killing of Renee Nicole Good, the facts, the context, and what happened after a federal operation ended in tragedy. And that's really the heart of the matter, isn't it? It's a question that goes so much deeper than a single incident. It makes us look hard at the systems we have in place, who they're designed to protect, and who's held accountable when it all goes terribly wrong. So before we dive into the details of the investigation or the legal questions, I think it's incredibly important to start with the person at the center of this story, because behind every single headline, there's a real human being. So who was Renee Nicole Good? Well, she was a 37-year-old U.S. citizen, a mom to 3 kids, but she was so much more than just a name in a news report. She was actually an award-winning poet, a person of deep faith, and a community volunteer who served as a legal observer. And this part is absolutely crucial. On the day this all happened, she was not a suspect in any crime. She was simply there to watch. Okay, so now let's walk through exactly what happened on that day, piecing it together from witness accounts and video footage. Getting this timeline straight is critical to really understanding the core of the controversy here. So it all started when Renee found herself in her car near an active ICE operation. That's Immigration and Customs Enforcement. Witnesses on the scene reported hearing 2 agents shouting contradictory commands at her, one telling her to drive on, another yelling for her to get out of the car. You can just imagine the confusion. In the middle of that chaos, as she began to move her vehicle away, an agent fired 3 shots right through her windshield. And later, video analysis confirmed a critical piece of evidence. Her car was turning away from the agents, not driving toward them. But the story doesn't end there. In fact, what happened in the moments right after the shots were fired is what really sparked so much of the public outrage. A bystander, who identified himself as a physician, literally rushed forward, offering to give immediate medical help to Renee. He was denied access by the federal agents at the scene. Witnesses said that when they pushed the agents, begging them to let the doctor help, one of them responded with just 2 words, "I don't care." It's an absolutely chilling detail, and it points to a total breakdown of procedure right there, where ICE vehicles also reportedly blocked local ambulances from getting to her at first. You're watching this explainer brought to you by webfitnews.co.nz, where we break down complex issues with facts and context. In the aftermath of the shooting, 2 very, very different stories started to take shape. You had the official narrative coming from federal authorities, and then you had the story being pieced together by witnesses and evidence from the scene. The first statements from federal authorities painted Renee Good as a threat, even calling her a domestic agitator. But that story just clashes completely with the evidence. No weapon was found on her or in her vehicle. She had no criminal record. And as we just saw, the video evidence shows her car was moving away from the agents, not towards them. The disconnect between the official story and the facts on the ground is just stark. Now, to really understand this case, we have to zoom out a little bit, because the source material makes it clear that many critics didn't see Renee Good's death as a totally isolated event, but as part of a broader and much more troubling pattern. And the data seems to back that up. It reveals a really disturbing trend. In the months leading up to this incident, there had been a noticeable increase in federal use of force cases all across the country. Immigration officers had fired on civilians in multiple cities, which suggests a pattern of escalating confrontations. So you have to ask, what was driving this trend? Well, a lot of it traces back to one piece of legislation, the 2025 Enforcement Expansion Act. This law basically opened the floodgates, pouring huge amounts of new funding and authority into federal immigration agencies. The problem was, as many legal experts warned, as that power grew, the systems for oversight and accountability, they just didn't. And that created a really dangerous imbalance. And this was not a small change. We are talking about billions of dollars being funneled into hiring more agents, building bigger detention centers, and buying advanced surveillance technology. This was a fundamental expansion of the size and scope of federal law enforcement. So when you combine this massive expansion of power with these very public, very tragic incidents, like the killing of Renee Good, the result was pretty predictable. In many communities, public trust in these federal agencies just completely fractured. And this loss of trust led to nationwide protests. The demands coming from people weren't vague either. They were very specific. People were calling for more transparency, for independent investigations into these use of force incidents, and for new, clear limits on federal power. So this brings us to what might be the most important part of this whole story. Why does one case in Minneapolis matter to everyone, no matter where you live? It's because it forces all of us to confront some really fundamental questions about our society. First off, when federal agents use lethal force, who actually holds them accountable? In these cases where local and federal authorities are both involved, is the current system of internal investigations really enough to ensure we get justice? And that leads to an even bigger question, one about balance. How do we make sure we have security without sacrificing our civil liberties? At what point does expanding the power of law enforcement actually start to undermine the very principles it's supposed to protect? And you know what? There are no easy answers here. But finding those answers has to start with being informed. This explainer was brought to you by webfitnews.co.nz. You can read the full story and all the detailed analysis at webfitnews.co.nz. And that really is the ultimate takeaway here. The answers to these huge questions aren't going to come from the top down. They're going to be shaped by a public that's engaged, a public that asks hard questions, and a public that demands accountability. Because that, right there, is the foundation of a just society.